One time the master was scolding a disciple, saying to him, "Why are you always so light? You should be more serious, because if you are always light, God won't be able to come to you." And he said, "Sir, I would love to change, but how can I do so without your grace?" Yogananda's answer was classic. He said, "Without your blessings." He said, "My blessings are there already. God's blessings are there already. It's your blessings that are lacking." Many people in religion, both East and West, think that it's a sign of humility and therefore a virtue and a good thing and a blessing to believe that God does everything. I remember I told this same story in India many years ago, and when I came to that reply of the disciple, "How can I do it without your blessings?" everybody said, "Oh, what a beautiful answer." They were definitely downcast when I gave them Yogananda's answer. Because indeed, we must understand that there is a need for both. God isn't going to do it without our help, they say, God helps those who help themselves. Many years ago, I remember I was giving a lecture in our church in Hollywood. And I remembered suddenly that Yogananda had said, "When you speak, ask that God talk through you." And I thought, well, here's a good opportunity. I'll just let him talk through me. So I stood there. Now, mind you, in the middle of a lecture, to stand there for 2 minutes and say nothing, everybody gets the impression you've frozen. I know a friend of mine was perspiring, thinking that I just frozen with fear. Actually, I was quite comfortable. I was just waiting for God to speak. Trouble is, he never did. I finally had to realize and accept that he will do it, but only if we do it too. Our lives, the greatest miracles, everything that is done in this world has to be by two powers, yours and God's. Now mind you, it's all God's anyway, and even if you have the thought that I'm doing it all, it's really He who is doing it. So many doctors think they heal. It's really God's power that heals. And when they fail, they blame themselves and feel very downcast. They shouldn't blame themselves. Do your best, leave the results in God's hands. But we do have to do everything in partnership with Him. And this is a very difficult lesson to learn. That was just one of many lessons that I've had to go through in life to try to understand this thing. And I can't pretend to have fully understood it even now. Where does God's grace end and where do your efforts begin? Where do your efforts begin and God's grace come in? Excuse me. You just don't really know. You do know one thing, however, that those who are close to God are never weaklings. They're always men and women of great power of willpower, and yet they know God's power is what they use, but they don't say, "God, you do it all." They aren't wimps, in other words. I'm just reminded of a curious story. I either read it or was told it, I forget which, but it was by an American soldier in India during the Second World War, and he saw one of these sadhus, these holy men, who had his arm upraised like this. And this is not a practice recommended by the greater saints, but nonetheless, some people do it, and he did it, and it seemed to help him in certain ways. But this American scoffingly said, "What are you trying to do, Daddy? Just waiting for God to send fruits down into your hands?" And the saint said, "Well, why don't you try it?" The man said, "What do you mean? Go ahead, lift your hands up." So he lifted his hands up, and he couldn't take them down. And he tried, he couldn't. He said, finally, he said, "Holy man, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to mock you." He said, "Help me to bring my hands down." The saint said, "Well, finish what you started." "What do you mean?" "Well, you wanted to ask God for fruits. Go ahead." So the man felt like an utter fool. So he said, "Heavenly Father, please send me some fruits." And all of a sudden, these beautiful mangoes and bananas came into his hands, and he was able to take his arms down. Said they were delicious, too. But we can never criticize. We can never say that my way is right and I know it all, because as soon as you do, I know I was at a Kumbh Mela, which is a great big religious fair that they have every few years in India, and millions of people go to these things. Well, anyway, I saw a bunch of these sadhus doing the same thing. They never lay down, they never sat down. This was supposed to be a penance. And it didn't seem to be helping them. I saw them with large ankles and calves and sort of gross expressions on their faces. And I was thinking, as Buddha did, this is a fanatical way. It is not the way to find truth. It isn't the way to please God, to punish yourself and so on. Well, anyway, I was taught a lesson in that one too, because I went from this place to another place where there was somebody who hadn't lain down for 13 years. He had a rope around his waist and he would hang from a tree, but this was just a discipline that he imposed on himself. He never spoke, but I would never do such a thing because I don't feel guided to do it, and I think it is extreme. However, whatever he was doing was very obviously good for him. He had a radiant smile, a perfectly formed body, radiated bliss and peace, and so you had to say that whereas it's not for me, it definitely was right for him. We can't criticize, in other words, but we do have to understand that we've got to do something. And those sects, whether Christian or Hindu or anything else, that say that it's a presumption to think that we can do anything, don't understand that God's not going to come in and get you out of bed. You've got to get out of bed. He's not going to open your mouth and make you chew and put food into your mouth. You've got to do it. He's got to do an awful lot through you, but the more you can keep the thought that it's with His power that I do everything that I do, the more you will see. And this is what I learned on that Sunday morning in the church in Hollywood, that I had to do it, but I had to ask for His inspiration. And I found that that's how it works, that when you're in tune, when I write music, for example, it's not that I sit there and say, well, give me a melody. No, I have to have a clear idea of what I want the melody to say. If I were a mathematician and God were to inspire me, He would inspire me with mathematical formulae, not with poetry, presumably. I may be a poet too, and He might give it to me in that form. I don't know. But as a rule, God responds appropriately. As Jesus said, if you ask your Father for bread, He's not going to give you a stone. And the alternative might well be true too, that if you're an architect and ask for a piece of, or a sculptor and ask for a stone, He's not going to give you a piece of bread. He'll give you a good stone. Like that wonderful stone out of which Michelangelo is able to carve the David. He had to find the right stone first. But God does give you these things, and you'll find the amazing thing in life is that the more you open yourself to guidance, the more things do start to work in amazing ways. It's not a miracle at all. There's no such thing as a miracle. But there is more of God's presence and less of it, depending on how we draw on it. It's not miraculous because that's the whole reality anyway. You're simply using another law, just as if you were able to, say, go back 400 or 500 years with a television set all charged up, maybe running on a battery, whatever, and play turn on a television program, and assuming that, all the necessary things. I'm not going to go into all the things to make it possible to show a television program 400 years ago. That's not the issue. The issue is that if you could, everybody would accuse you of magic. And they might put you on the stake, who knows? Because it would be to them a miracle and an impossible and obviously satanic when you see the programs that are on TV. And so the thing is that when saints do what seem to be miracles, like there was this Sadhu Haridas in India, and it was a very actually well-documented story. It was in the newspapers and so on, but there was a Christian missionary who was on a boat on the lake with him, and He was trying to convert Haridas, and Haridas said, well, it's all one truth and it's all one God. But the missionary kept saying, but you've got to accept Jesus Christ. So Haridas said, well, what can your Jesus Christ do? What could he do that I couldn't do? And the missionary, since they were on a lake, it occurred to him, well, he walked on water. Haridas said, is that all? He got out and walked, and the boat followed him wherever he went. This is not, he wasn't even like Jesus. He wasn't Christ-like. He had powers, but that's not being Christ-like. Jesus made that point clear too. But there have been Christ-like sages in other countries who manifest the consciousness, the love, the unconditional. There was another Haridas, not that one, but he was a Muslim in Puri who converted to become a Hindu. And the king of Puri was a Muslim, and he got very outraged and demanded that Haridas recant and go back to his Muslim religion. And Haridas said, I can't help it. I just am in love with Krishna. God, for him, in the form of Krishna, was what inspired him. And so the Muslim king, the Raja, condemned him to be beaten to death. And he was strung up by his thumb or wrists or whatever from a tree, and these men with cudgels were beating him in order to kill him. There was a crowd of people around, all watching this execution, and some were exulting in the proper death of this lapsed Muslim, and others were grieving over the death of a devotee, and all the usual human reactions. And Haridas, just as like Jesus on the cross, when he said, forgive them, for they know not what they do, he said even more than that. He said, Lord, let them feel the joy and the love that I feel, even now. And those people in the crowd began dancing and singing God's name. And they were so filled with joy and ecstasy that even his executioners finally had to drop the cudgels and began dancing also. Leaving, I suppose, poor Haridas strung up, I don't know. But this kind of devotion, this kind of love for God, when you have it, you can't help but express it. You can't say, well, I love you, but I don't love you. You love everybody equally, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, doesn't matter. Jesus, I'm perfectly certain, would show more love. He'd have equal love for everybody, be able to show more love for a Muslim who loves God than for a Christian who doesn't love God. And when you go to heaven, assuming you get there, and I presume you will, I mean, you've come here, this means something. I don't mean that in the way it sounds, however. I mean that even a little bit of effort toward God lifts you toward Him. Even a little bit of thinking of God's name, as Krishna said, even a little bit saves you from dire fears and colossal sufferings. So it's a great thing indeed. But when you get there, God isn't going to say, were you a good practicing Baptist or Catholic or self-realizationist or Hindu or Christian or anything. He's just going to have one question: do you love me? And how deeply? That's all that matters to God. That's all you'll be able to take with you. Mind you, if people, even when they get senile, can't remember their own names, are you going to get up there and God says, what church was that now? I don't know, but I think it won't be that important to you. The thing that will be important to you is that you love. Love, 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 joy. God is not a man or a woman for that matter. God is not a person. God is an infinite consciousness manifest in you. And whatever love you feel comes from Him. Whatever strength you feel comes from Him. Whatever wisdom you feel comes from Him. You are a manifestation of His. And the more you can live in that consciousness, the more you will find that He permeates your life. But He's not going to do it if you just believe. How many people believed that the world was flat? It didn't make it so. If you go walking off a cliff in the dark, not knowing the cliff is there, believing that it's solid ground, that's not going to save you. You'll fall off the cliff. You just have to know what's real You have to live according to the law, you have to live according to the truth. But if you do, then you will find the more you live according to truth, as you understand it, the more you will be able to find what you are really looking for. What you're looking for, all people are looking for. Two things, Yogananda explained it. He said they want to avoid pain and suffering. They want to find happiness. This is universal. Even the animals want to avoid pain and find happiness of their type, which certainly is not an absence of happiness. They just have less refinement in their ability to enjoy, we presume. But nonetheless, all beings want these twofold things. They want to escape pain, they want to find happiness, which may mean just a good meal to some of them, may mean just a little less discomfort to some of them. But all beings are motivated by these twin desires. Why are they? Because there's the nature within each one of us to want our own self. We come from bliss. We were made of God's bliss. We come from that. And the goal of life is to reclaim that which we are. God is not outside you. God is that reality within you that you discover the closer you come to being completely at peace with your inner self. This is what life is all about. Now, we've got to use our willpower, but the more we use our willpower independent of Him, the more it is like, well, you heard Vasudeva singing this morning, first of all without the microphone, and then they realized they could put the microphone on him, and suddenly you heard him full. It's like that. It's like a guitar without a sounding board, just a string. When you do it just yourself, you're cut off from the greater power. When you attune yourself to that power, it's simply like tuning yourself to that sounding board. There's a power behind you. This is the difference between a mediocre composer, let us say, and a great composer. A mediocre composer thinks, I'm going to do this with my own mind. A great composer says, I will do it with God's mind. But the great composer doesn't say, God, you do it. As I was saying earlier, I don't just ask God for a melody. I tell Him what kind of melody I want. He needs my help too. He's not going to just load me. He's not going to presume. He's very shy. But when I clearly tell Him what I want, then I find that melody is there right away. And this is how anything that you do, you can cook, sew, everything you do can be creative. Even the way you speak to people, very creative. But always in the back of your mind say, God, guide me, help me to understand. Don't wait for Him to straighten it all out. It isn't His way. I remember we were very discouraged in our work in India because the people there had never really understood what Yogananda's mission was. And they just did a few little pujas for 7 people on Sunday morning and went home and had lunch. That was all there was to it to them. But I certainly felt that much more was possible. And when I lectured, I found 2,000 people came. And the reason was because I put energy into it. I didn't just do a sort of lackadaisical puja looking at my watch. And so I remember at the end of our visit there, Dayamata said, what's going to happen to this work? And one of the sisters there, Sister Revati, said, well, Master's here. Master will take care of it. I said, listen, he's been here for 40 years, and what has he done? You've got to use your common sense. He wouldn't do it without our doing it. He needs instruments. If nobody in the world bothered to try to do something spiritual, nothing spiritual would happen. God's not going to stand up on a cloud and make things happen. Why did God punish the Jews? Because He saw that they wanted to do the right thing and mistook it. But if they'd been indifferent, He wouldn't have bothered. God helps those who help themselves. Yes, God also punishes those who want to do right. But He's not going to bother with those who don't want to do right. Their karmic law will catch up with them anyway. You see, there are 2 kinds of punishment. One is that which you attract to yourself. The other is with a little extra kick coming from God to say, okay, time you listened. But He'll do it if you want to do right. Otherwise, bit by bit, He'll turn away. Regretfully, yes. But if you don't open the door, as Yogananda said, if you keep me out, how can I come in? We have to open the door to God's grace. We have to open the door to His love. And this we must do by our own effort, yes, but always trying to draw on that as we act. It's as if while acting, try to feel, what is it you're doing through me? What is it you want me to do? And you'll see that the proof of whether it really is God's will or not will be that when you do it in the right way, there's a rising joy inside you. And when you don't, there'll be a certain uneasiness. I know I was many years ago, I was going to write a letter to somebody which I felt this person needed. But after writing it, I asked God, is this what you want to say? And I felt, no. I felt a certain nervousness. So I said, okay, then I won't send it. You'll notice, the more you try to do these things, the more you'll feel that when it's not right, there's a certain nervousness that comes in, a certain feeling of dis-ease, not disease, but dis-ease, uneasiness. And when it is right, you'll feel a certain supportive joy. Now mind you, in this supportive joy, there's also the emotion. It's not an easy thing at all. It's sort of like a muscle. As you use it, your strength grows. And so as you use your intuition grows also. And so in the beginning, it's sort of like going to the horse races. You want your horse to win, and so you're absolutely convinced it will win. And the more you put your enthusiasm in it, the more you feel it's going to win. And when finally it comes in late enough to be the first horse in the next race, you, you realize you've made a mistake. Well, so you see that people get all excited. Oh, good, yes, it's got to be true. I know it's true. And if your emotions into it, don't trust it. But there's something deeper than emotion, that when you can feel a calm joy, then you're beginning to get the hang of intuition. Intuition is always calm. It's never excited. Intuition will say, yes, it feels right, but I don't know how you can tell, because it's something you can't really convey to other people. But I'll give you an example. Back many years ago, the owner of the East-West bookstore in Menlo Park down in Southern California next to Palo Alto, I used to go there because my parents lived there in Atherton and it was nearby. It was a metaphysical bookstore. And one day she said to me, I'm getting old and I just wonder if Ananda would like to take over this bookstore. And I said, well, I'll just think about it. But I didn't think about it very much. I didn't know how serious she was, and I let it go. But I meditated on it a little bit, so I was sort of preparing the ground. Well, months later I came in, and she asked me again more seriously. And she said, would you be interested? Well, this time I consulted inwardly, and I felt, yes, we should. So I said, yes, right there. I didn't have to go home and meditate on it. You'll find that the answer can come like that. If you ask, I didn't want it for us. I didn't want it just if it was God's will. So I said, is this what you want inwardly? 2 seconds later, I said, yes, we'll take it. Now, mind you, we didn't have the money. Minor detail. We needed $45,000 down payment. We didn't have $5. And yet that was, to me, just a detail. I wasn't worried about it. Somebody gave us $37,000. Somebody else gave us, within the 2 weeks or whatever we needed in order to come up with the down payment, we had it. And this East-West bookstore down there has become one of the most popular. It already was well known. It's become one of the really top metaphysical bookstores in America. And now we have a branch here in Seattle doing even better, or at least very well. And we have another one in Sacramento. And because of that bookstore in Palo Alto, we've decided, well, we need a staff, so we better start a community. So we started a branch community there. And so this work has spread. But always what I've done and what we do is ask. Now, mind you, you don't have to spend a month asking. You just ask once very clearly, and you can get the answer very quickly. Not necessarily, because that's God's timing. But indeed, the answer can come very quickly if you ask seriously and sincerely. Now, there are certain conditions that are needed in order to use your will in a God-given way. Use your will in such a way that there is a sounding board behind you, giving strength to your will, because otherwise you'll find that whatever you do, it'll fall flat in time. It doesn't have the sustenance of the universe behind it. But if you have this, then you will find that there are certain attitudes that are very, very necessary. One is, don't have the attitude, what are you going to do for me? It doesn't work that way. You have to realize that to tune into that sounding board, you've got to be a part of that great sound. You've got to be a part of that great vibration. In other words, don't think of what's it going to do for you. Think what you can do for it, yes. What you can do to fulfill God's will. You can tell God, mind you, this works. If you say to God, I just want your will, but help me to do it. As we prayed today, I will reason, I will, but guide thou my reason, will, and activity in everything that I do. And you will see that the more seriously, the more sincerely you make this offering and say, I don't want it for myself, Lord, but if it's what will help you in your work, if it will help other people, if it's the right thing to do, then it will happen. I'll tell you a story. I told it recently. It's a good story. I felt many years ago, this was 1972, and I felt that Divine Mother, I always think of God as my Divine Mother. So I said, Divine Mother, is it time for me to go back to India? I hadn't been back there for 10 years, and I wanted to know if it was time to go back, and I felt, yes, it was. And I felt she wanted me to go back. Well, I had a little money saved from classes, and a few people gave me some money so I could go, and it added up to just enough to go, and so I was all set. However, 2 weeks before I was to go, my car did something or other. Now, if it's not a flat tire, I don't know what it is, but anyway, it did something. It threw a rod, and they said I needed a new car. Well, to get a new used car even would have meant I couldn't go to India, and it was a bit of a puzzle. In 2 weeks I was to leave for India, but I knew that I couldn't stay there. I'd have to come back. I live up in the mountains, and without a car I couldn't function. So I said, well, Divine Mother, what do you want to do? Well, she was regally quiet. And I was with a few friends, and we were going, we had no church to go to. The church's doors were all closed. We didn't have our own church in San Francisco at the time. And so in a cafe, in a restaurant, having lunch, all I could say was, Divine Mother, if you're not going to tell me what to do, my common sense tells me that when I come back, I'm going to need a car. I'm going to have to use the money to buy a car. If you really want me to go to India, you're just going to have to reimburse me. Just like that. And so with that thought that if God wanted it, he'd do it. So I put 1,100 into, the car cost 1,900. I took 1,100, see, how did it happen? I spent 1,100 on the car, that's what it was, and it needed more money that I was able to come up with later, but a down payment on it. And this was Friday evening. I got this new used Renault, which was a decent car at the time. Friday evening. I had given it Divine Mother, mind you. This is the important point to remember. Monday morning, I got a letter from somebody I'd never heard of. He said, I've just been let out of the army, and I wanted to do something for Divine Mother, for God, and I wanted to send you, I just felt inspired to send you this check for $1,000. Use it as Divine Mother wants you to. You know, how many people in this country think of God as their Divine Mother? Not very many. How would he know that I thought of God as my Divine Mother, even if he did? Fewer. How could he come right at that moment with the return mail, you might say, from Friday night to Monday morning, and give me just 100 short of the money I'd put out of my savings into that? It really brought tears to my eyes, thinking how often God has taken care of when there is a sincere desire to do his will, not the desire to do one's own. I'll tell you another little story. Of one time, many years ago, we had a sort of a fundraiser for what we call euphemistically, downtown Ananda. And we wanted to beautify it by bringing in trees and so on. And they wanted $10 for a plant and $25 for a tree, and it looked much more beautiful afterwards. But I saw one request was for it was $2,500, I think it was at the time, to improve the road. And I thought, well, nobody's going to come up with that money. I don't have that money, but we do need it. So I said, Divine Mother, all right, you do it. I'll pledge $2,500. I don't even have 25 cents, but I'll pledge $2,500, and you have to give it to me. Now, mind you, you can talk like that to God if you do it with love. I wasn't saying you do it like that, no. But you know, I had 2 weeks to come up with this money. I wasn't at all worried. I knew something would happen. One morning, just a few mornings later, an envelope was stuck under my door. I didn't tell anybody I'd made this pledge. I don't want to confess my insanity to everybody. And somebody asked me once, are you ever nervous? I said, I've never been nervous lecturing, because if I'm a fool, I don't mind if people know it. But before the act, why let them know? So anyway, this envelope came under the door, and it was from somebody who used to be a member of Ananda, was only visiting, knew nothing of anything that we'd been going through. But he said, my mother died a few months ago, and I wanted to give you this money in memory of her. Use it as you want to. And it was just the right amount for my pledge. This sort of thing it brings tears to your eyes when things like this happen, because you know God is taking care of you. He has you by the hand. You don't have to worry how things will happen. You know that they will. And you don't have to worry that He won't test you, you know that He will. Of course He will. Why shouldn't He? He wants to know if you're serious. But He will help you. And always, even at the last moment, He will pull you through. You know, I even heard somebody said that Yogananda said, I never heard Yogananda say this personally, but he said that the Christian martyrs didn't feel pain. That pain was taken away from them. There's this one story of this martyr who was being toasted, killed by being put next to an oven, and at a certain point he said, turn me over, tyrant, it needs doing on the other side. He didn't feel it. Well, if there's faith, you will see that God is always there, but you've got to put out the effort. And the wonderful thing is that whereas your own human will can't quite figure out how to do it, God will do not only that, but much better than you imagine. These are not beautiful fancies. These are not lovely fairy stories. I've lived it. I know hundreds of other people who have lived it. I've seen it in the life of my great master who gave me that kind of faith by the way he lived, that God is always there and always concerned and interested. You know, it's so strange. You think of God, how huge He must be. 200 billion galaxies maybe, each one with 100 or 200 billion stars. How can God pay any attention to us? But you know, that which is infinite is also infinitesimal. And God is neither large nor small. He completely defies human reason. You can't think of Him that way. But God, as Jesus said, He counts every hair on your head. He's conscious of every thought that you think. And the more you are aware of Him, the more actively aware He is of you. God is concerned for your welfare. There's this beautiful story that Yogananda used to tell about, well, this is again sort of myth and truth both, you see. And so God is up there in heaven, and He sends a messenger of his, Narada, down to earth to find out who his true devotees are. And so Narada tours the country of India, which is because they were Hindus, he was going to India presumably. But anyway, he found a list of different holy people and so on. And then he happened to meet one person who really impressed him. For 80 years this man had sat doing severe austerity and fasting and not sleeping and doing all this self-discipline and so on. And when Narada came to him, he was most well impressed with this man. And the man said, "Oh, you're from heaven, are you? Well, why don't you go and ask that heavenly father of yours why he hasn't come down? I've spent 80 years, and look at him. Where is he?" And he went on talking like this. Well, Narada was a little bit nonplussed by this attitude, but he was certainly impressed with the man's dedication. So he promised to take this message back to the Heavenly Father in heaven when he returned. A little bit later in his journey, he met a young man who was drunk. And this young man was trying to fix a post in the ground so that he could make a fence. Well, he kept missing the hole and staggering. And when he heard that Narada had come from heaven, he said, "Well, you tell that Heavenly Father of yours I need his help. And you tell him to come here." And but he spoke with love. And Narada thought, well, God's certainly not going to be very interested in a drunk. But anyway, he promised, so he said he would. So when he got back to heaven, he started talking about these devotees, and God would smile at each one. And then he mentioned this anchorite who had lived there for 80 years in the forest. And he talked about him and his great dedication and so on. And God searched his omniscient heart and said, "Well, you don't seem to know that man." He said, "Well, Lord, you're very peculiar. How could you not know him? He's been so devout." He said, then he at the tag end of his story, he told about this drunk. And he said, "And then I came upon this man who couldn't find the hole." "Oh, yeah, I know about him." And he said, "Well, Lord, what is this? You don't know about this dedicated anchorite, and you even know this drunk?" So the Lord said, "Look, I'll teach you a little lesson. Go down there and just give them a simple message. Say the Lord is very busy right now passing elephants through the eye of a needle. But when he's finished, then he will come back. He will come down and see you." And so he went to the anchorite. The anchorite said, "Passing elephants through the eye of it? I never heard of anything so crazy." He said, "Goodbye, God and all your crazy crowd. I'm going to go back to the city and enjoy the little remaining of my life that I have left." And so Narada thought, well, this is a pity. But so he went to the drunk, and as soon as the drunk saw him, he came over and embraced him. He said, "What did God say?" And he said, "Well, he's told me to tell you that when he's finished passing elephants through the eye of a needle, he'll come to you." And the young man said, "Oh, he who could pass planets through the eye of a needle in an instant must be finished with that job. I'm sure he'll be here soon." And he started dancing with Narada. And as they were dancing, the Lord was in their midst dancing with them. And the boy lost his drunkenness and became filled with bliss. Well, this is the attitude that God likes. Not that you be severe, not that you be puritanical and self-righteous, not that you be learned, but that you simply love him. A story comes to mind because of that story of the drunkard, that Yogananda was crossing a hotel lobby many years ago. He was a young man. Maybe he had his robe on, maybe it was something else, I don't know. Usually in the public, if he wasn't lecturing, he didn't wear his robe. In any case, whatever really happened, this man, seeing him, he was dead drunk, like that young fellow. And seeing Yogananda, he said, "Hello there, Jesus Christ," and sort of embraced him. And the people who were with Yogananda were really offended, but Yogananda didn't mind anything. And so he thought, well, let me give him a taste of real joy. So he just conveyed to him, shared with him the joy he was feeling, and this man sort of reeled back. He said, "Hey, what are you drinking?" Yogananda said, "Well, it has a lot of kick in it." And then he touched him and left him sober and thinking a bit. But you know, God doesn't mind your faults. God minds your indifference. If you love God, that's much more important than being absolutely rigid in your everything, but not loving him. So what is the greatest thing you need to do when you think in terms of self-effort? Well, not just skill in building bridges, skill in writing music, skill in writing novels, skill in this, skill in that. No. The most important thing God wants is your love. And the most important way to draw on his love is, well, here's a simple little illustration. You have the sun shining on the side of a building, and the curtains are drawn. That sun can't come into a darkened room, but it's not the sun's fault, is it? What you need to do is separate, draw the curtains apart, then the sun can come in. And we are all in the same room with God. His sun is shining on our souls. But if we keep our minds' curtains drawn shut, how can He come in? We need to open ourselves to Him. We need to say, God, come to me. He will come to you. This is not a doubt. He will come to anybody. If you love Him, if you open yourself to Him, and any little chink that you open to Him, He will come. And you will see that the more you do it, the more open He will come. Now, mind you, if you're busy thinking all the time, and if you're praying, God, please do this for me. I remember a cousin of mine, she told me that when her first child was born, it was born with a defective heart, I believe it was, whatever it was. She was praying intensely. Now, a mother, having given birth to her first child, you can be sure she prayed with all the intensity she was capable of praying with. She told me it was so maddening. I simply couldn't help my mind. I heard children running. I just hoped they weren't running over the flower bed. I heard the milkman pass. I hoped he would stop and drop milk on our doorstep. All these extraneous thoughts that I couldn't prevent from coming in. Now, when you pray to God and you say, God, please do this and so on, but I wonder if I'm going to have what I'll have for dinner, He doesn't know which prayer to answer. I'm sure He answered her heart's call. The child lived, and it's very well. But the fact is that we need to pray not just lackadaisically, restlessly. We need to pray intensely. That's where self-control, control of the mind, control of the feelings, ability to concentrate, that's where yoga comes in. It teaches you to concentrate. When you can concentrate one-pointedly, then you can attune yourself to that inspiration that is available to everybody, but they keep their windows closed not just by doubt, not just by indifference, but by sheer restlessness. Their minds hop from one thing to another. We need to learn to calm and concentrate our attention. The more we do, the more we find that there is a power there behind us. We can do it if we give Him a chance to work with us. If we can move through life hand in hand in partnership, you will be amazed at how little things God takes seriously, because He's you, He's in you, He created you, and you don't have any reality except Him. What else did He have to create you out of? He didn't have a lump of meat to gather into a human form. He had nothing but His consciousness. He dreamed you into existence. You are a part of that dream. And the more you dream with Him, the more you will see that even in little things, He will take care of you. God will take care of you. God's power plus your own is the key to success in everything.